This is Lisa Henderson, Editor-in-Chief of Applied Clinical Trials, and I'm here today with John Greist, Consultant at ERT's Pro Solutions, and John Patty, Chief Scientist and Regulatory Advisor, Outcomes at ERT. And they are graciously joining us today to discuss the revised draft guidance that was released on August 14th on suicidal ideation and behavior, prospective assessment of occurrence in clinical trials. And the first question I had today was, why has the FDA updated and revised this guidance?
Why is a big question when we come to the FDA, as you know, Lisa. I think what I find very interesting in tracking guidance over the past, I don't know if I want to admit how many years, but X years tracking FDA is what's really interesting to see is a revision to the guidance prior to them putting out a final guidance. In other words, just going from draft to final. So what we would interpret that, and again, just thinking about this, is that they saw a need to do some refinement even prior to the long and arduous process for them to put out what's called final guidance. So I think that obviously they felt some need to do some clarification. In terms of just quickly contrasting then, the old and the previous guidance from 2010 and then the recently released one, we see this as really bringing more clarification in the current guidance. We don't see any major shift, which is a good thing. We've sometimes seen significant shift as you go from draft to final guidance, or as a revision is being done. And I saw that back in the early 2000s with some other guidance. So no major shift here. What does that mean? That FDA really sees the importance. Here is a change. We used to call it suicidality. Now we're calling it suicide ideation and behavior. That this is really important to evaluate prospectively in the context of certain types of products. That message has not changed. What they have done is basically started to point to, so industry, we're telling you need to do this. Here's some clarification around our expectations, including the CCASA, some clarification on the CCASA categories, basically helping, from our perspective, helping the industry understand that this is not as great a burden as you might think it is. So they address things about assessment time burden, and we have a specific solution that our organization has developed, an electronic version of the Columbia, which is one of the instruments that the FDA supports, that demonstrates that this is not a significant burden. They're also looking at some more specific things around capturing at each session or each investigative site visit during the trial. So why is the big question? The same reason they put out the first one, they're putting out the second one. We see this as a way of potentially being more descriptive and prescriptive so that the industry can embrace and implement these activities even before a final guidance comes out.
I would just reinforce what you were saying. The two main goals of the prospective assessment are to identify patients at risk and help manage that risk, and to collect complete, timely data at the time the data are available, rather than retrospectively trying to ferret them out of case report forms and adverse event reports, which was so laborious in the early work they did. So that hasn't changed a bit. That's been reinforced. That will continue. And the questions now that you addressed as well were, is this too much of a burden for the sites, for the subjects in the trials? Is the lifetime assessment that's collected at baseline of real value in identifying patients who would have more behavior, suicidal behavior, during the short term of the trial? And the new guidance provides some evidence in all of those areas.
Excellent. And so, Jean, you had said that it was more of a clarification. What are the most significant changes?
It shifts from 4 of the 9 previous CCASA classifications to 11, and 10 of those 11 are exactly the ones that are in the Columbia Suicide Severity Rating Scale, 5 for ideation, 5 for behaviors, and then added as the 11th is the non-suicidal self-injurious behaviors. And to make that distinction from suicide attempt to non-suicidal self-injurious behavior is important and not easy. The other things that were addressed were the time burden. We all wondered how much this would slow us down with the patients that we're seeing. I'm still doing studies. It was a question in my mind. We learned from the electronic Columbia Suicide Severity Rating Scale in the first 35,000 assessments that the mean completion time was 3.8 minutes. It was 3.5 minutes for the 98.3% that in essence were negative assessments, and only 7.7 minutes for the 1.7% of the assessments that had positive ideation or behavior. And the completion rate was 99.89%, which is the confirmation that the time burden from the patient perspective, from the site perspective, is not great. Another very important issue that has been raised, the field has wondered how much benefit you really get out of a lifetime assessment, something that may have happened 20 years before in the breakup of a romantic relationship in high school. What relevance might that have to a patient's participation in a trial now, decades later? And from this 35,000 assessments, 6,000 of them were at these baseline times and questioned lifetime ideation and behavior. And it was found quite strikingly that those lifetime assessments did predict a substantial increase in the odds ratio between 4 and 9 times, depending on which combination of ideation and behaviors were there, a 4 to 9 times increase in odds ratio of suicidal behaviors during the remainder of the trials, which run weeks or at most months. So it answered that question, and FDA was pleased to have their expectation that the lifetime assessment would be valuable confirmed. So those were some of the main points. The guidance, the current guidance, the August 2012 guidance, did explicitly mention the electronic Columbia Suicide Severity Rating Scale, which had not been explicitly mentioned in the September 2010 guidance.
Oh, that's excellent. Well, thank you all for joining me today. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Lisa.
Take care.